Hey, welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. That's the main man there. Greg, a pleasure as always. Wildcard weekend had a bunch of good individual performances, maybe not the most competitive games as we worked our way through that. What are they calling it now? Super Wildcard weekend, not just
Super wild card
Wildcard
weekend. Come
weekend.
on, Buck. It's super wild card weekend.
Yeah, I don't want to dismiss Wild Card Weekend. I got to give it its propers as far as the level of super that it brought. But it did bring a couple of different things, and now we have the divisional round set. Greg, we'll get to see the number one seeds for the first time, both on Saturday in the postseason, and I suppose that's the place that we should start. Houston going to Kansas City, a dominant defensive performance by the Texans against the Los Angeles Chargers. I don't know if they'll be able to recreate what they did to Justin Herbert against Patrick Mahomes, but certainly it would be a successful formula to keep at least Houston in this game.
Well, these teams played week 16, Buck, as you probably remember, and it was a competitive game. Um, and the big issue here when you talk about the Texans D and the Chiefs O is the assumption that many have just based on past history. So it's a valid assumption is that, hey, it's the playoffs, so Patrick Mahomes will up his game and become Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, during the season, the numbers weren't what we've seen in the past. He did throw the ball a ton. He had the second most dropbacks in the league, so they were still a passing team. Just the nature of the pass game was different. It wasn't a big play passing team. Now they've made some changes on the O line, and quite frankly, Joe Tooney has played really well at left tackle. It's funny. Jason Kelsey was in our building here at Films yesterday, and I was speaking to him, and he was really raving about Tooney, and he certainly knows more about O-line play than I do.
Mm.
So so we'll leave it at that. But he said Tooney's played really, really well at left tackle. But I think the issue there could be at guard where they're playing Caliendo and our old buddy Danico Autry, he's not talked about a lot because of Hunter and Anderson, who deserve to be talked about, obviously. But Danico Autry is a really good football player, and that could be a factor here as well. And let's not lose sight of Stingley and Lassiter. Lassiter, as a rookie, the rookie from Georgia, has had a phenomenal year. Everybody knows about Stingley, but as far as two edge rushers and two corners, they could be near the top of the league in what they put out there. So again, without knowing what Patrick Mahomes is going to do, this game, when you look at it and analyze it based on what happened this season, to me, it kind of has the feel of a competitive, not a high scoring game. And by that, I mean, I'm not saying it's 13-10, but I wouldn't see this game as 38-35 just based on both defenses. We know about Spags and the Chiefs defense, really good. I thought the Texans coaching staff did a really good job last week with Stroud. They
Mm.
let him settle in early, a lot of quick rhythm throws, almost some of them were no read throws. By that I mean it's just you throw in a one guy, get the ball out, let him get in rhythm. Because where has he struggled this year? He struggled this year when he's had to sit in the pocket and try to make late in the down throws. That's where he struggled. He did make one phenomenal one in this game, which was really nice to see to Collins for 41 yards, but they really helped him. Mixon gained his yards, through the flow of the game in the second half. Because I think they had 21 plays in the fourth quarter, of which 18 were runs because of the way the game flowed.
Yeah, and to your point, they tried to run the football in the first half, Greg. They didn't abandon it in the second half, and they were able to have more success. And Joe Mixon, just such a tough runner,
He's
even at the
tough.
later
Yeah.
stages of of his
Yeah.
career, for sure.
I looked up his stats, yeah, when I was watching that tape this week, and I always loved him coming out of Oklahoma. That was a great running back draft class, by the way, if you were to go back and look at the backs who were in that class. But, um, he's had five 1,000 yard seasons. I mean, it's not like he's just some guy,
Yeah.
he's pretty good back.
Yeah, and certainly it's no small test to go up against the Chiefs defense, especially that interior defensive line.
Yep.
Expects to have Chris Jones back in the
Yeah,
mix.
and I don't think he played in that week 16 game. So, but that game, I think stylistically, my sense is that's what we would expect. And Spags ended the game there. I think there were about 4 minutes to go. It was a one score game, 27-19, third and long. He called one of his Spag specials with the blitz with a DB involved because they use DBs in the blitz game, the second highest percentage in the league. Only the Bucks were higher. So he's really good in those critical moments, Spags, of calling these blitzes that for whatever reason offenses just don't pick up.
You need to get with him on a trademark for Spag Specials. That belongs on a t-shirt somewhere,
There,
Greg.
there you go. Yeah, yeah. A spag
Uh,
special.
I know that these aren't necessarily things that are relevant to your film study, Greg, but I'll go through the NFL communications things that they send out about
Oh
players'
no, no, it all
accomplishments
matters.
and things like that. But it's just crazy that if the Chiefs win on Sunday, that would tie Pat Mahomes with Joe Montana for the second most postseason wins among quarterbacks in NFL history. Long way to go to catch Brady at 35, but still insane. Uh,
Especially since he's only is this his sixth year?
Sixth or seventh for sure.
Seventh, yeah, yeah.
It's disgusting that he's still an
Well,
ascending
I
player.
think we know he's pretty good.
I think it's a fair assumption at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah.
The problem is for everybody else, he continues to get better.
Yep.
That's the crazy, and I know we've touched on that before, but Allen, Mahomes, Lamar, and Burrow, the fact that they are still ascending players and continue to perform at such a high level, it really is not fair to the rest of the AFC. Speaking as somebody who covers
Who's
them.
in the AFC? Yes, 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 yes.
Long hill to climb. Anyway, so
Right.
as we move from one seed, getting back into action to the other, the Commanders are at the Lions this weekend. Jaden Daniels is just, he makes it look so easy, Greg. And we all know that it is just not. But the job that Cliff Kingsbury has done with him specifically, creating these opportunities to allow Jaden Daniels to get comfortable, to get into a rhythm, to get into a flow, and then allow those special plays to come out as a result has just been so much fun to watch all the way through. And that was probably the best game of the weekend between the Commanders and the
Yeah.
Bucs.
And I think that Daniel's legs, and this is not a profound statement, but they're really such a critical factor. And it's not just running. Obviously, he runs, but it's the way you impact and break down the discipline of the defense. I mean, there have been plays where he leaves the pocket and the underneath defenders in zone coverage react to him because they think he's going to run. And then he makes throws. He makes throws behind them. So it's a really, really big factor. And of course, you do have the design quarterback run game that is used situationally. Um, I don't think they punted this week, if memory serves me correctly.
They did
But
not.
uh, so and the thing that makes it really interesting is they don't necessarily have a consistent, sustaining run game with a running back. I like Brian Robinson as a player. Eckler's back, but it's not as if they line up and run the ball, on a week-to-week basis with any kind of real consistency. And obviously the receiving core. I think a quarterback like Jaden Daniels helps a receiving core because of his movement. It's look, I remember having a great conversation with our old buddy Dean Pease a
Hmm.
number of years ago when he talked about quarterbacks. He was talking about Lamar Jackson at the time, but Daniels, stylistically falls into that category. Not the same, but stylistically. And he said, when you play quarterbacks that can move like that, in a sense, you have two defenses. You've got your defense for 2.5 seconds, and then it's almost as if you're playing another defense after that. And he said that's really, really hard. And that's the problem you face when you face quarterbacks like Jane Daniels. It seems like the play's never over.
Yeah. And it's an interesting matchup in particular this weekend, Greg, because Detroit, we understand that their injuries were all over the place with the defense, but the last time we saw them, they played one of their best games of the season
Well,
against the Minnesota Vikings in Week 18.
and the thing about Aaron Glenn, and again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, Buck, but he's super competitive. And they play man coverage and they pressure. And they did that in their last game, which was against Minnesota. Obviously, Darnold is a different quarterback than Daniels, but I think Aaron Glenn will probably do much of the same. Now, he'll probably have to make some concession to the fact that Jaden Daniels can move. Maybe it's a spy, maybe it's altering the rush, but he's not all of a sudden going to play soft and play zone. That's just not the way they play. So he's going to be aggressive. Don't forget when you are aggressive, sometimes you can force mistakes as well. So I think that's what you'll see. That's a fascinating matchup. That defense, which does have some injuries, but they did get Anzalone back in their last game, and he's a critical piece. The one thing they do have at linebacker, because Anzalone's 6'3", 245, and Jack Campbell 6'5", 250, is they've got really excellent size and length, and they're both athletic.
Yeah. I don't know. I understand that they're two different styles of defense, but just in terms of the aggression, going from Todd Bowles one week to Aaron Glenn the next is no small thing for a rookie quarterback who's only the fourth rookie quarterback ever to win their first career playoff game on the road the way that Jaden Daniels did
And
last.
Bowles blitzed him a lot, and he was
Yeah,
very, very good against the blitz. I mean, the numbers were really strong. He wasn't necessarily phased by it. Now the teams have different blitz concepts. Bowles is mostly a zone pressure guy, whereas Aaron Glenn is much more of a man pressure blitzer. Meaning that when I say that, it means you're playing zone behind the blitz, and whereas Aaron Glenn plays man coverage behind the blitz. So there are different kinds of blitzes with different coverage concepts. But still, Jaden Daniels handled himself extremely well versus the Bucks pressure last week.
yeah. The challenge here, though, for Jaden Daniels and that Commanders offense is keeping up with Detroit because we understand what kind of high-powered, highly schemed Detroit Lions offense that they have been able to orchestrate all year long. And that's, for the Commanders, there's a couple of things that they obviously do well on defense, Greg, but this is a difficult offense for
Yeah, and,
anybody
and their
to stop.
run defense has been spotty at times. So,
Yeah.
and I think Montgomery, it seems that he'll be back, but Jahmyr Gibbs has averaged 21 carries a game in the last 3 games without Alexander, and man, is he explosive. He just moves at a different speed than a lot. They've got two guys on offense who seemingly move at a different speed, and Gibbs and Williams, well, both from Alabama. But I
Right.
mean, and those you have to account for that, and it's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, no question. Especially when you get to this point in the postseason. There's no easy games. There's no easy games in the NFL, but certainly
No.
these are going to be some fascinating tactical matchups as we continue to move through the divisional playoffs. So you've got the Rams now going to Philadelphia. Philadelphia, who I thought they managed the situation well against Green Bay because Green Bay's defense, the score was lopsided, Greg. We understand what
But
that
but
ended
the
up
game
being.
wasn't.
But the game wasn't. I
Right.
I hope that you could speak to that at a more informed level, other than what I was watching Green Bay's defense do, which is certainly not put their sword down against the Philadelphia offense
Well,
last week.
the Eagles have a defined identity on offense, and that style of offense normally doesn't produce a lot of points early in games. What happens is it becomes a game of attrition, and as the game progresses, because they also have a very, very good defense, is then they in the fourth quarter they just wear you down. And Barkley, I think he has 1,245 yards in the second half alone this year. So they play a game of attrition. Now, the interesting thing is, can they keep doing that as they continue to go through the playoffs? And that's an unanswerable. Um, I keep waiting for the week in which they're going to use their two wide receivers, Brown and Smith, to attack on the outside because that's a strength of Jalen Hurts throwing the ball outside the numbers down the field. I thought it would be last week against Green Bay's corners. I think you could probably take those shots this week against the trio of outside corners that the Rams play with Williams, Witherspoon, and Durant. So I keep waiting for that to happen, and it hasn't happened yet. But they do have a distinct way in which they play. They've won 15 games, so you can't argue with it. It may be a little tedious for Philly fans. They may get sweaty palms and sweaty armpits, but that's the way they've played, and because they've not been with very few exceptions this year, the Eagles have not been up big going into fourth quarters. They wear you down with Barkley in the fourth quarter. But they're clearly a run first defense based team right now, and they're playing at home again. Really hard place to play here in Philly, as you probably know.
I've only done one game at Philadelphia, but certainly it was not. It did not go well for the Titans that day in particular. But yeah, that environment is pretty singular among NFL stadiums. We know that the Rams are maybe not a perfect defense, Greg, but a challenging defense because if they do, and you don't expect the Eagles to get into a drop back passing game based on their style of play, but we know that this young defensive front for the Rams can
Right.
get pressure with regularity.
Well, but that's the interesting part of this game because how will the Eagles choose to run the ball?
Hmm.
Because, Fisk normally does not play in what you'd call their base front, um, because he's a pass rusher. Now, Turner will play at times in their base front, but they usually have different defensive tackles who play inside when they're in their run stopping group. And it's usually not Fisk and Turner. So to me, that'll be interesting. that pass rush front is terrific and may have evolved into being the best true pass rush front in the league at this point. But will that be a factor in the game the way it plays out? I mean, yes, are there going to be third and nines? Of course there are. But is that going to be enough that's a big factor in the game? That's what we don't know. But the Rams, boy, their defense has really evolved this year. They play a ton of what we call big nickel with three safeties. Quentin Lake, I don't know if he's known nationally. He is a really good football player. They played the rookie Cam Kitchens from the University of Miami. He's part of that big nickel and he plays in their dime. Jalen McCullough, who you know from the University of Tennessee, has become a critical piece in their dime defense. So they have a lot of moving parts, a lot of young players who are playing really well. We'll see how all that plays out. But we'll see how the game goes because obviously they're going to have to score some too,
Yeah.
because you have to try to get the Eagles to play a little differently than they want to play.
Yeah. And Eagles certainly a stingy defense throughout the course of the year. But, Matt Stafford has the experience to get it done. And I thought that it was just a really well-rounded performance from the
Yep.
Rams and Minnesota. Sam Darnold, I don't know if it was his worst game of the year, but he certainly struggled. They had
Well,
him in,
their O-line was so overmatched.
yeah,
You know, look, we're all on social media, and I just, to be honest, I get tired of the ripping of Darnold and Herbert. I mean, there's so many extenuating factors here. I mean, he got sacked 9 times, and he was under duress the entire game. I don't remember if I spoke to you about it, but I know I spoke last week numerous times about how the biggest mismatch in that game was going to be the pass rush run of the Rams versus the O-line of the Vikings, and that's exactly the way it played out.
yeah, absolutely. 9 sacks for the Rams defense against Minnesota, which tied a postseason record. Greg, can you tell me the last time a playoff team got 9 sacks in a
I
game?
believe it was the Tennessee Titans against Joe Burrow and the Bengals.
Oh, it sure was, and you would assume that that would be a lopsided result in favor of the team that had 9 sacks. But we
And
it's
I believe the Titans did not win that game.
I think there are still Titans fans who are traumatized by that game, Greg. It looked like a bomb hit that stadium after the way that the Titans lost, but
Yeah.
understand the mitigating circumstances that went into that one. Finally, and it's tough to top this, at least on paper, this matchup of the Baltimore Ravens heading to Buffalo to take on Josh Allen and the Bills. I mean, just what Lamar Jackson how Lamar Jackson has continued to elevate his game.
No.
Todd Monken is getting all these guys involved, even in the absence last week of Zay Flowers, of course, Greg. This is such a fun matchup for a variety of different reasons. I wonder where you want to start.
Yeah, this one, there's just, I mean, you have a Ravens offense that's just so difficult to defend. It's just so hard to defend. And look, they didn't have Zay Flowers last week. They normally don't play a lot with 11 personnel, meaning three wide. They played even less of it last week because Flowers was out. They actually played 16 snaps with six offensive linemen, which is something they haven't really done. Maybe that was a function of Flowers being out. But it's so hard because Lamar is so difficult to defend. And they came out early against the Steelers and they pretty much said you're going to have to defend Lamar in the run game. Forget about Henry right now. You're going to have to defend Lamar in the run game. And then you always have Henry. I mean, last week prior to the Steelers game, their OC Todd Monken basically came out and said Henry is our key, but it's just so hard to defend Lamar and Henry. And then the pass game, Lamar's played really, really well this year in the pass game. I mean, you know, I don't get into who should be the MVP. That's not really relevant to me. They're just a really difficult offense to defend,
Yeah,
really difficult.
yeah,
Um, and the thing is they're different than other offenses. They don't play a lot with 11, so you don't see that a lot in the league. Um, you can't duplicate Lamar in practice. When you're preparing, it's just you can map out tactics that you want, but then the speed is just it's just not the same.
yeah. I'm just so curious to see how this one goes in terms of flow of the game, Greg, because Buffalo, I mean, they have consistently over the course of time, we touched on it last week, improved the efficiency of their run game, and they just do it with so many different kinds of runs, and I think that was
Right.
evident in this
Well,
Broncos Bills game in the wild card
well,
round.
It's interesting you say that because the Bills clearly decided going into the Broncos game that they could physically beat the Broncos front. And they came out and as I said, they play with six offensive linemen, the most of any team in the league. They did that a lot. Cook had 13 carries in the first half. Nine of them were on first down. So
Mm.
they came out in this game and pretty much said, we can beat you. We can physically beat you running the ball. Now, I don't know if they can do that against Baltimore. Baltimore's got a really big defensive front, really big. And I think they're number one or number two in the league in rush defense. They're really hard to run against. Um, so that's, I mean, obviously, that's one of the main parts of this game, main matchups. We don't know the answer to it. Um, so the question is, how did the Bills see themselves going into that side of the ball with that matchup? Do they think that, hey, we can run it and we're going to try, or we have to back off the run a little bit and make this more of a Josh Allen game? That's what you don't know. The weather is supposed to be brutally cold.
Yeah, no, and it's a luxury for Buffalo to be able to, choose how they want to go about this in the same way that the Ravens can to
And I
some.
know you'll be up at that game with no shirt on, right?
I don't know that I've definitely been shirtless at a sporting event, but that was back in college when I think we did the body paint for an Indiana game.
That was
When
back in
Indiana
college
basketball was good, not
yeah, that
lately
was
though.
back. Yeah, when you were unaware of the fact of what you were doing. Yes, yes, yes.
Well, from time to time.
Right, right, right.
It's going to be a fascinating divisional round for a variety of different reasons. And to your point about kind of how Buffalo sees themselves in this game, because you articulated it very well. Denver is a light and fast defense. They've got
Right.
light, fast defensive ends specifically. Baltimore is not built up front really anywhere
I mean,
close to it
Baltimore's
that
base
way.
defense, when they play those guys inside with Matabuke, with Washington, with who am I missing? Jones. I mean, these guys are 320.
Yeah.
Jones might be 340. These are
Michael
big
Pierce is
dudes.
three something.
Yeah.
It's
The
a
point
big
is
boy.
there's a three before, that's the
Yeah.
first number.
Yeah.
Those guys are hard to move.
Yeah. Just quickly, Greg, on a housekeeping front before we get out of here for the week. Mike Vrabel is the next coach of the Patriots.
Yeah.
That is an interesting fit for a variety of different reasons. But, I think a lot of people look at job openings in the NFL, or at least fans look at job openings in the NFL and say, okay, young, talented quarterback, that player needs an offensive mind to help develop him. But the offensive coordinator is as important as the head coach in this particular situation because of what Drake May offers in terms of his potential and what
Well,
more they have to bring out of him.
I mean, I'll answer that this way because this is someone a lot smarter than I am. Dick Vermeil used to come in and watch tape with us because obviously Ron Jaworski was his quarterback. I worked with Jaws for years. So maybe two, three times a year, Dick Vermeil would come in and spend, 4 or 5 hours with us and watch tape. And obviously it was just, I mean, it was an unbelievable lesson. It's master class. But I never forgot one thing he said. He said, when you draft a quarterback, number one, top five. He said, everything in that building, not just the coaching staff, everything in the building must be focused on making that guy great.
Mhm.
Because he says, if you don't focus everything, then it doesn't work. He says, you eventually get fired. He said, I know that every coach thinks, well, we want to have a complete team and all. He says, that's all good. No one is going to say, let's have a bad secondary. No one's going to say that. This is me paraphrasing now, obviously. But he said, when all's said and done, everything has to be geared toward making that guy a superstar. So, you know Mike Vrabel better than I. He's anybody I've ever talked to about Mike Vrabel. I remember talking to Scott Pioli about him, and Pioli said this guy's one of the smartest people that he's ever been around. And so Vrabel is you know this. I mean, he's a commanding personality. He's incredibly football smart, but he has to make sure that Drake May becomes a star.
Yeah, and no small feat because that roster is down bad, as a diplomatic way that I would put it at this
Yeah.
point in time. But they've got draft picks and they've got cap space, so we'll see how that endeavor goes. Greg, enjoy divisional weekend. I know you guys will be breaking it down on the NFL matchup show that people can get on ESPN on demand at ESPN Plus. You can set your DVR the way that I do and watch it as you please to get you ready for another round of postseason football. Thank you, my friend.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it, Buck.